Air procs got a bit too close. So this is the June 2025 edition. I like this title here. Watch out for the wire. Do you know what that reminds me of? Watch out for the wire. I'll tell you what that reminds me of. I remember seeing this on VHS. Now, some young whippersnappers might not know what a VHS is. This is what it reminds me of.
George of the jungle, strong as he can be. Watch out for that tree. George of the jungle lives a life that's free. Watch out for that tree. When he gets in the scrape, he makes his escape with the help of his friend. An ape. Then away he'll schlep on his elephant. Shep, Womfella, and Ursula stay in step. Well, George of the jungle, friend to you and me. Watch out for that tree. Watch out for that tree. George of the jungle, friend to you and me.
Yeah, so that's what that reminded me of. Reminded me of George of the Jungle. Watch out for that wire. Watch out for that wire. Cables worked well in bringing down aircraft during the wars. So why would you fly near them? All right, so what's happened? Cool. Way back in February 2023, I wrote Insight newsletter highlighting, among other things, the risks involved in flying over a glider site that conducts winch launching. Most do, below the maximum winch launch height. That newsletter was followed by a CAA podcast on the subject and advice to pilots on the CAA's website regarding flights in. Let me zoom in. I was wondering why this looks different. On the CAA's website regarding the flight in the vicinity of gliding sites. And we watched that video a couple of episodes ago. Since then, we have seen fewer reports of such direct overflights, but they do still happen. Take this event, AirProx 2 2025-011, which I can honestly say is one of the most alarming I've come across in 12 years of working for their UK AirProx board. It involved SZD 51 junior glider and a PA-28, which is one of the aircrafts that I fly, over Longmind gliding site. The glider was winch launching and had a nose up altitude of about 45 degrees, restricting the pilot's ability to look out in all directions. What's more, the launch phase is particularly busy time for any pilot, so they were also concentrating on that. The PA-28 pilot was approaching the area from northwest at an altitude of about 3,000 feet and was receiving basic service from Shawbury Zone. However, the glider was not equipped with a transponder and actually didn't show at all on the radar until about 5 to 10 seconds before the closest point of the approach between the two. So there was no opportunity for Shawbury controller to warn the PA-28 about the glider, right? So the pilot had an electronic conspicuity device that could have detected the FLARM equipped glider, but it seems that there was no alert from that device to warn of the glider's proximity. The FLARM on the glider would not have detected anything emitting from the PA-28. So there was no warning to the glider pilot of its presence either. Worryingly, the last line of defense, see and avoid, didn't work either because neither pilot sighted the other aircraft at the time. This air prox was reported by the glider pilots after they had been told what had been seen by the launch crew on the ground. So they didn't even really see it, right? The crew on the ground told them. The closest the aircraft actually were to each other was recorded, the closest the aircraft actually were to each other was recorded at about 400 feet vertically, with the PA-28 below and the glider, with the PA-28 below the glider, and 0.15 miles horizontally. The reason that the writer finds this air prox so alarming is not just because the aircraft got particularly close, but because there were two cables attached to the glider at the time the PA-28 passed below it, right? So glider launching, I've only got one model. Glider launching, PA-28 coming, and potentially cables, death, basically. That almost guaranteed, actually, guaranteed pretty much from 3,000 feet. Yeah, guaranteed pretty much, unless you're lucky. Like I saw some video with somebody that was really lucky. They went through an electric wire, actually. So they went like that, and it took off the canopy, and they survived. Very lucky, very, very lucky. So this is a, yeah, I would have probably been, yeah, I'd probably have needed a change of underwear, a change of underwear after this kind of air prox. So it's a salutary lesson that flights in the vicinity of glider sites need to be careful or carefully thought through during pre-flight planning. Of course, gliding sites are usually in Class G airspace and do not have any protection around them, such as an ATZ. So there is definitely no requirement to avoid them. However, flying close to a glider site increases the likelihood of encountering gliders and gosh, I'm doing so well. And transiting below the maximum winch launch altitude adds further hazard. The cable, or in this case, cables, right? On the CAA half mil or even quarter mil VFR charts, glider sites are depicted by a G symbol surrounded by a circle of 1 nautical mile radius. The circle does not signify any airspace associated with the site. It simply is there to draw attention to the presence of it, right? In this case, it's saying that winch launch could go up to 2,500 feet. If the symbol is accompanied by a number in the bottom right-hand corner, this signifies that the winch launch takes place and the maximum altitude of the winch launch. Simply put, the potential height of the cable at the top of the launch plus the airfield elevation. So, of course, you could still have gliders hanging out, flying above this point, but that's the highest point of the launch. So this information is available on SkyDemon, on charts and blah, 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 and it's really important to be mindful of that. Now, it might be a good time to revisit the guidance on flying around gliding sites. So I'll just pull that up and have that in the wings ready to go. Flying over gliding sites. It's a nice short video that's actually quite good. And we'll finish with that after I just have a quick scan of whether there's anything else to pull out. So if planning, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So if planning to fly near or over such a site, we should be considering what altitude we want to fly. If we can't or don't want to fly above the maximum altitude of the winch launch, then we should consider either giving the site a wide berth, about 2 miles, again, taking 2 miles horizontal separation, about 2 miles, but should normally be enough. But the greater distance from the site, the greater the distance from the site, the greater the likelihood that we won't encounter traffic departing, arriving, or in the circuit. So in and about, there could still be gliders in the circuit that might be a little bit difficult to spot. Yeah. So the wider you are from that site, the less you are to encounter that traffic. A word of caution here, though: glider pilots are not required to hold a flight radio telephony operator's license, and it is very rare that there is an air-ground operator at the gliding site, so don't necessarily expect an answer to any calls you make. But it does not mean that the site isn't active, so that's really useful to know. Another point worth mentioning is that in the case of the PA-28 pilot, in this case, the PA-28 pilots had a couple of issues with their onboard equipment. Nothing dramatic, but it did mean that their attention was divided between trying to resolve the issues and lookout. There is obviously little choice if we are flying on our own, but if you do have company in the aircraft, consider dividing the task so that at least one person is looking out at all times. Finally, I'd like to offer something for all those involved in gliding activities to think about. I'm reliably informed that it takes roughly 1 to 1.5 minutes for the full process of a winch launch. During this time, a GA aircraft flying at a normal airspeed will cover around 2 miles. A trial conducted by Gasco and Jarvis Bagshaw found that it's unlikely that a GA aircraft will be seen beyond a range of about 2 miles. This means that at the point of visual clearing the airspace for a glider launch, it is unlikely that any aircraft it is unlikely than any aircraft that might be present. Gosh, shall we try that again? This means that at the point of visually clearing the airspace for a glider launch, it is unlikely that any aircraft that might present a threat to the launch will be within visual range. That's a pretty weirdly structured sentence, if you ask me. Food for thought. Anyways, basically, don't fly into it is the basic idea, or fly high enough to avoid it. But even if you're flying far above the winch launch cable highest length or height, you could still encounter gliders in and about. So don't take my word for it, because who am I? I don't really know much. I'm still trying to learn all of this stuff, and we're on this journey together. But I tell you whose word you can take. I tell you whose word you can take on this as gospel. Whose word can you take as gospel? These guys.
Almost all gliding sites in the UK use a winch launch, where gliders are launched with a winch and steel cable instead of being towed by an aircraft. 90% of sites winch launch to at least 2,000 feet above ground level. So if you see a gliding site marked on a chart or moving map, it's safe to assume cables could be overhead at any time during daylight hours. A glider will go from ground to over 1,000 feet AGL in about 20 seconds, so a pilot won't be able to see the launch happening from the air. Spotting the glider as it climbs will be too late. The danger hasn't passed once the glider is released either, as you won't see the cable as it descends under a small parachute for another 20 to 30 seconds. Flying over an active winch launch gliding site puts lives at risk. So what should a pilot of a powered aircraft or helicopter do? Look for the location of gliding sites and check the altitude to which they operate when you plan your flight. A VFR paper chart will show the site marked with a blue circle and a G, with a figure in thousands of feet AMSL telling how far the cable may extend. For example, G 3.3 shows that the cable launch can operate to and be released at up to 3,300 feet above mean sea level rather than above ground level. On most moving maps, the site is shown with a glider symbol, but no maximum cable altitude is shown. So you may have to work through a menu to reveal the details by selecting the Location and Review tab at the side of the screen, where the altitude will be listed along with waypoints and radio services. The gliding site altitude only refers to the maximum altitude of the cable. So you should also plan for gliders being towed or in free flight around a launch site and above the annotated altitude. Whatever you use to plan your flight, you'll find gliding site details in the UK AIP at ENR 5.5 Aerial Sporting and Recreational Activities. This includes winch heights above ground level and site elevations above mean sea level. If you are a glider pilot or club member, it's really important to record and report overflight occurrences to the British Gliding Association, which has an incident reporting form on its website. Your club might have its own incident book or system to record the information they need too. If the overflying aircraft caused danger and compromised safety, you should report an airprox. The UK Airprox Board will accept an overflight report from a responsible ground observer, instructor or duty pilot, as they understand the lookout limitations of a winch launching glider pilot. Pilots of powered aircraft and helicopters should avoid gliding sites at all times. Only ever fly over them if you have had positive confirmation from the site that they are not active. Find out more at caa.co.uk/gliding sites.
Well, there you have it. There you have it, from the horse's mouth. The horse's. Did I just call the CAA the horse? Did I just call the CAA the horse? Listen, CAA, I'm sorry. I didn't mean it. I'm sorry. Please forgive me. I don't want you to follow me for anything. I'm sorry. Please. Right. So that concludes our safety brief for the week.